Okay, I think we're setting up the stream. So I think it's loading it onto YouTube.
Now streaming.
Was that?
Mhm.
Okay. We're on YouTube. Okay, I think we're setting up the stream. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. This fine company is a real pleasure. We kind of know each other. Well, actually, I don't know. James, Kevin, do you guys know each other? Oh, you've met before, I'm sure of it, but I don't know if you have had a chance to talk. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
We've met on a number of occasions, yeah.
So we kind of all know each other here. So the question is, how can we use this time most productively? There are always ideas I would like to discuss. So there's always something. But if any of you have something that you would like to take the lead on, any issues, ideas, any questions about, what we're doing. And I mean, I could go over, I have a tendency to repeat myself, but I could go over some of the upgrades that are going to be coming online. I could try to do it quick if you have any questions about that. Otherwise, I mean, we know each other. I suggest we dig into some ideas. But what do you guys think?
I agree. I would like to dig into ideas.
Kevin, what are you thinking?
I'll go with the flow, gentlemen. I don't really have anything myself specifically to talk about today, but I'll go with the flow and willing to go wherever you like to go in terms of the discussion.
Okay, sweet. If we get some new ideas, we might have to shift gears kind of back into some of the elementary steps, read opening notes, do introductions, stuff like that, if we get someone new. Otherwise, we can just get into business. Do any of you have a specific idea that you would like to advocate in advance? No? Nobody wants to take the lead on presenting an idea for us? I mean, I could always pick something. I'm happy to just pick something from my IP and discuss it. If there was something on your mind.
Let's go with that. Because I want to respect the process that has been working here so far. So rather than me presenting an idea that is not on my own Igora IP because I haven't created one, let's go with one of the ones that you've set up and let's engage that.
Okay. Well, so just to show you, this is my inbox, and I've actually successfully cleared out my inbox except for this one idea. And I still have to clear out my other inboxes, but especially the community one. But this is the one that James and we have left to discuss. Now, Kevin, you've been to a few of these discussions, but maybe we could actually address this here today. I don't know. How do you feel about that, James? How do you feel about that, Kevin?
How do I feel about discussing the nature of reality idea?
Yeah. Well, we have someone new joining.
I like the idea. I could use a little assistance in navigating to the idea within Agora. So I'm logged into Agora and I actually don't know how to find that idea.
It's my 23-point idea. So it's at the top of my ideological profile. But we are joined here by Nancy Green. Welcome, Nancy. Wait, hold on a second. Any relation to James Green?
No.
Okay. Wow. Half the room is green today. Hello, Nancy. Can you hear us? Hello, Nancy. Hello, Nancy. Okay. I don't know what's going on with Nancy. So let's just continue with
Yeah.
as we were. So my 23-point idea, were you able to pull it up?
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Oh yeah, and I could actually share this idea. That's right, I should do that. I'm going to share this idea in the chat. So all of you can pull it up if you want. I'm going to pull up the link to it. It's going to be a moment. But so this idea, just to give a little bit of an introduction, this idea is intended to be, give people an idea of who I am, like what my philosophy is and what my other practical ideas are based upon. Because they do, this idea is relevant to a lot of political ideas, especially as it gets into the whole concept of rights and, you know, rights and responsibilities, things like that. But let me bring it up on screen and let me just actually read it, the first section of it, and then we can discuss it. Nature. So, and this is like, these are the different headings of the of these different sections: nature of reality, human capacity for understanding reality, mechanics of reality, ethics, rights, trust, and politics. So, section 1. Reality is a fundamentally mysterious duality between the realm of subjective experience, also known as consciousness, and the realm of physics, time, space, matter, and energy. It seems that we will never learn which is most real, because the realm of experience appears to be generated by the realm of physics, while the realm of physics is dependent and or can be reduced to experience. The two are inextricably interdependent on one another, like two sides of the same coin. What are your thoughts on this? Actually, I usually like to read section 2 right after section 1, because they help inform each other. Section 2, the concept of God as a person and creator of the universe, is the product of the not yet fully understood potential of language to create misleading concepts, unwittingly self-deceptive fiction, and the selfish desire to be favored by a universe that is dedicated to making us happy. Instead, God is most sensibly interpreted simply as existence as a whole, one that is indifferent to our subjective happiness or suffering. Subsequently, the question, does God exist, is pointless and does not deserve to be answered or even considered. All we can say meaningfully is God is existence, or God is. Furthermore, any inquiry into the nature of existence should be aimed primarily at how our subjective existence plays a part in the grand scheme of existence, and it should be performed through self-reflection and self-exploration, such as meditation. It is our own existence that is much less certain than the existence of God. Okay. Would any of you care to comment on this?
Sure. I'll start by responding to that last part in section 2 and say that I am a Cartesian, so I don't doubt my existence.
Well, that's nice. Good for you. Okay. Well then, I don't know, Kevin. Did you want to comment on any of this?
No, I'm really ill-equipped to comment, for the most part. It's relatively new territory for me, gentlemen. And you know, I just want to be a sponge. I want to learn, and I want to be present and pay attention and take advantage of the fact that neither one of you have anything else to do today. And hopefully I can learn from you guys today.
Oh, I do. I'm sure we both have things to do today. This is just our favorite thing to do. At least for me, it's one of my favorite things. So one thing I wanted to add to this, in a way, what this is, it's a very indirect way of saying that we are all God. Actually, it's you know, but being human and being animal, being conscious, is really just like one of the. It's just a part of God, you know. So the point is that instead of looking for God, if you examine yourself, if you look at yourself, explore yourself, you will be like, holy shit, like I'm actually God. And so is everything else. And, you know, I'm just a part of that entire system of existence. And it's complicated. The first section is to say that you can't really understand it because, and the reason for that is that experience is greater than understanding. And the reason for that is because understanding is just an experience. Understanding is just one of the different hues, you could say, of experience, and it cannot encompass. Understanding cannot encompass experience, but experience encompasses understanding. But it's okay because it doesn't matter anyways. Like, it's not like you have to understand it. Actually, one of the main points of my philosophy, this is really one of the main points of my existence, is to popularize the idea and the understanding that understanding is a desire, just like is the drive of understanding. And actually, you're going to see this theme continue to develop in this idea. This is actually becomes one of the most important, the most important section of this whole idea actually is built around that, just the desire for understanding. But let me continue with reading this idea. Section 3, free will is an illusion. Humans, like all other animals, are subjectively experiencing biological machines. We are controlled by our desires, and our desires can only be controlled by our other desires. The complexity of the interaction among our desires gives us the illusion that we are somehow in control. Any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I completely disagree.
Oh.
I don't think it's an illusion. I think it's a reality. Free will, that we have free will, and that we're not fatalistic machines, but that we have a strange and mysterious ability to, as agents, to create by choosing.
Choosing what?
No, between two things, between two different things.
And how do you do this choosing?
Well, that's a different question. Being able to explain how it is that we have choice it's a legitimate question, but it's a different question. Whether we have choice and how choice works, how choice is built into the universe, two different. I can't explain how it's possible for us to have choice, but what's immediately obvious to me is that I do have choices, that that what I choose impacts. If I choose to raise my hand raises. It's obvious, but I can't explain it.
I say if you can't explain it, then it doesn't exist.
Mhm.
You can't explain it because it doesn't exist.
Well, then you would have to explain the fundamental building blocks of how we have the experience of having choice also. And I don't think you can do that.
I don't think you actually have the experience of having choice.
Mhm.
You actually don't. I think what I can explain is how this misconception came about, and it really has to do with language. It really comes, this whole concept of self-deceptive fiction.
No, because there are.
We're in citizen assembly. We don't interrupt each other. This is the just because this is small, it doesn't mean that we have to break the rules.
Go ahead.
Okay, hold on. So I lost my train of thought a little bit. It's really what it has to do, and this is related to another idea that I want to write. It's called essential political vocabulary. Oh, I think Kevin's making some noise. I want to write this idea, essential political vocabulary, and one of those things is I want to explain free will. What free will is as a political term. Politically, it makes sense, and practically, it makes sense. Like for whatever reason, the word came about. I choose this. Like, I'm gonna make myself lunch later, and I can choose whether to eat my lunch with a fork or with a spoon. And so, if I'm telling my roommate, like, or, if my roommate is standing by the cupboard and I'm sitting down and I'm about to dig into my food, but I don't have any utensils, she can say, what do you choose to eat with? Do you choose a fork or a spoon? I mean, in a political sense, it makes sense to, like, as far as she's concerned, it's a mysterious type of process. And so we call it that. We have a name for it. We have choice. And so to her, it's mysterious, but ultimately there is a reason why I will choose a spoon versus a fork. It's Indian food. It's kind of sloppy, so I can't wait to actually have some Indian food now that I think about it. But so in a political sense, and we use this language, make sure that people have the freedom to shop at McDonald's or at Burger King or Subway or whatever, or whether people choose Pepsi or Coke. Makes so much sense that people have choice. But in a philosophical sense, and that's where people conflate the two meanings, because then people try to understand it without actually trying to understand it. And they just claim it that it's as mysterious as it is politically. But the point was that there's not just choice. We do have another term. There's also the language of decision making. And so my point is, philosophically, is to say we definitely make decisions. Like in casual speak, choice, you can use the word choice however you want. Although I actually tend to avoid that word. I prefer, even in casual speak, to use the word decision. But decision it's not as philosophically charged. Decisions are just, and I've heard that the etymology of the word decision is actually to cut or something. It comes from the root is to cut, which means you're cutting off all the different possibilities that would have existed, that you could have taken, but you are deciding that I will take this possibility as opposed to all the other ones. Like if you have a tree branch, you have all these different branches. all these different ways that things can branch. But if you're cutting off those branches, then you're proceeding down, you're picking that path. Now, I use the word decisions in order to emphasize, like, the decision making those people who say that, proponents of free will, philosophical free will, they can say that decisions can be made by choice. I say that decisions are made deterministically and through calculation, through weighing of options, you could say. Basically calculating what is the optimal path for you to take. So I just wanted to clarify, there's also the language of decision. I prefer that one. It's not as philosophically charged. I think it's actually cleaner than the language of choice. You'll hear me use choice sometimes, but generally I reserve the word choice for the philosophical proponents of free will, and that's why I avoid it. I yield the floor. Welcome, Ilya. James, I think you have the floor next. So, if you'd like.
Sure. I don't think it really does matter if we use the word choice or decision. For me, they're the same. I agree that choice, the root of the word decision or choice, is relevant in that idea of cutting, that we are, when we choose one out of two choices, if we choose the first, we cut out the possibility of the second. That makes sense to me. Philosophical choice, I think, my understanding of Cesari's position on this is that choice is not only an illusion for the person making the choice, but also for the, as we observe others making choice. So whether there is choice or not, something is happening at the fundamental level, skeleton of the mind brain. Something is happening. And I think the proponents of the idea of no free choice are saying that there is something happening at the chemical, structural, mind-brain level, which is determined, like the placements of electrons rotating around a proton, that those things are happening, and we don't, as conscious beings, we don't perceive it. So we have the illusion of choosing apples instead of oranges, but actually it just simply follows from how the electrons are interacting with each other. That may be, but despite that fact, other things that have the makeup of atoms, like rocks, don't seem to be behaving in the same way that agents, things that we understand as having agency, like living creatures, those things don't seem to have the same characteristics. And if you really look at the ways in which these agents behave, especially if you look at the way in which humans use language, to say that it's all unfolding from a determined state of how the universe is, that we don't impact the universe, it's just happening, I think covers over the fact that it is characteristically different from other things. There's some quality that these agents have, able to act with basic creative power to, for example, invent things that have never appeared before. So when I create the sentence right now and I say, James was making pancakes 3 times on Easter every time dinosaurs were watching The Simpsons, I can be sure that no one in the history of the universe has ever uttered that sentence. And by doing that, I have created something new, and we need to account for that. I yield.
Okay, I'm next. As complicated as the universe is, there are all kinds of structures that arrangements. I mean, you could look at the stars. Of course, it depends on constellations. You could say, frankly, those things don't even make any sense because they're just like, I'd say they're quite arbitrary how people pick them. But you could depending on which stars you pick, you could always look at a completely new constellation. There's always, so it's not like there's nothing special about you creating things new that haven't existed before. It's all just a matter of like which grouping of stars do you want to look at to consider it a constellation. I mean, the possibilities are quite infinite. So your silly sentence really doesn't show all that much. But I want to come back to that point that you were making. How do I have the experience of choice? And my point was that you don't actually have an experience of choice or free will. And you are used to thinking that you do because you're used to not paying close attention. You're used to just calling it, there's just a bunch of shit happening. You kind of loosely, casually, are aware of it, but usually you go with it. Like, for example, with my situation of, picking whether to pick a spoon or a fork to eat my Indian food with. Am I really like, is it some kind of a beautiful, mysterious process, or am I just quickly thinking, okay, I mean, fork is should be the default. Like usually, and I'm accustomed. Okay, fork is the default because usually you eat food with a fork, and spoons are for soup. I'm not eating soup, so I should eat with a fork. However, what I'm eating is actually quite soupy, even though it's not really a soup. It's quite soupy, and I should probably just use a spoon. And that was, if I don't think about it, it's, you could be like, oh yeah, this beautiful, mysterious process of choice, or what a free will. No, it's just really quickly analyzing those possibilities. And there was a reason for why I pick a spoon instead of a fork. But so yeah, basically the point is that as soon as you actually pay attention, you will see yourself calculating. And the more you pay attention, the more you calculate. Now, of course, there's always this question of like, why are, there's this aspect of your memory. Why are these points becoming relevant? Maybe it's all really a matter of how many ingredients are being fed into the system. And this might have to do something with how much your consciousness is aware of, and how, because, your consciousness can only focus on so many things. I think there's been like studies on this, that there's only a limit. There's a limit to how many things you can keep in your operating memory that you can actually work with. Like, like if you have a desk, kind of like very much like your desktop on a computer, your desktop is only effective if you have, just the several things. The same as with your physical desktop. If you have all kinds of shit on your desktop, it becomes very overwhelming. You can't actually use your desktop as a workspace if you are using it for storage. This is why we compartmentalize things, both physically and and representationally on a computer. And we do the same thing, I think, with our memory, with our operating memory, and with our long-term memory. because, you know, maybe in making that decision of what should I eat, it's almost like a, okay, let's take chopsticks, for example. Like whenever I eat Asian style food, I like to use chopsticks. It just makes me feel more Asian. It just like enriches the experience. So maybe, you know, when making my decision, whether to eat with a spoon or a fork, for whatever, maybe I remember it or maybe I don't. The fact that in India, maybe people don't, people actually in India eat Indian food not using forks or spoons, from what I understand it, but I think they actually eat it with the bread. They actually take the bread and they dip the bread into the food and they put it right into their mouth. So if I remember that, then, or if then I would, why did I not choose to eat my Indian food with bread? Well, because I didn't remember it, right? So if I really wanted to be authentic, but then again, do I really want to get that messy? So, I mean, you can see me making this decision right here, right now. There's nothing about choice contained herein. It's all practical things and considering how important are these things to me. Now, of course, there's the fundamental question is like, why do I value staying clean? Well, maybe I want to go out right after I eat, so I don't want to get myself dirty. Or maybe I'm going to do laundry right after I eat. So what the hell? I'm just going to dig in with my hands. So like all these different things. And of course, there are certain fundamental values. I value just being clean. Some people value being clean a lot less. Some attractive, that's another thing, you know, how attractive you are. So, but anyways, the point I'm trying to make is there's a reason for all of this thing. The question is how much of this stuff actually comes into your operating memory as opposed to your, you know, your storage memory. And the other point is that language, you know, we are accustomed to using it in a political sense. So then when we are lazy philosophically, then we use those crutches that we've developed practically. We try to do our philosophy the same way, but no, it isn't. One other thing I wanted to just touch upon before I yield is that there's also this aspect of randomness. Some of that, sometimes I just want to try to be random, just do something different, completely different. And, you know, randomness exists and unpredictable. And I also want to draw the distinction between unpredictability versus randomness. Randomness is a very specific concept from physics that the consequences of an event are not consistent to their inputs. Like, for example, if you have two tennis balls or two billiard balls, one of them hits the other one, and the outcome is always consistent. This one transfers this energy. Randomness means that whatever are the inputs of this, because one of those inputs is the inertia of this ball and the inertia of this ball, but randomness would imply that when this input is made, this ball would do something completely different. Maybe it's going to go in this direction, or maybe it's going to go in this direction. Maybe it's going to go in that direction, or maybe this one impacts this one and they both decide to go in this direction for absolutely no reason. They just, or maybe before this ball hits it, this one just moves, like completely unpredictable, meaninglessly random. But that kind of, that's a concept from physics. That concept might translate in some ways to consciousness. Most likely, we're not actually, when we say we're being random, we're not actually being random, we're being unpredictable. So unpredictability, like for example, very complicated determinism, causality, can also create systems that are just unpredictable. They look like randomness, but it's not actual randomness. It's just simply very complicated causality, and it looks like randomness, but it's actually unpredictability. I yield.
Thanks. I would like the floor. I'm just going to post a link to a discussion on this topic, and it addresses some of the points that both of us are making specifically with regards to randomness. And I just have one final thing I want to say, which is just a quote from Chomsky. It's in this conversation on free will. And the quote is that we can't just abandon believing free will because it's our most immediate phenomenological and obvious impression, but we cannot explain it. If it's something we know to be true and we don't have any explanation for it, that's too bad for our explanatory possibilities. And that's all I have to say.
Putting my hand up next unless somebody else would like to speak next. Okay. So people, for whatever reason, people like it. I actually really don't understand why people are so attached to free will. I mean, to me, it's so obvious that free will is just meaningless. It doesn't exist. It's like there's no practical use for using this concept other than like in a political sense, but in a very casual political sense, to say that sure, you have the free will, or you have the freedom. Technically, you should just say freedom. You have maybe that term should actually be eliminated from my vocabulary. Maybe I shouldn't even use it in a political sense. Maybe I should just use the word freedom. But you have the freedom to shop wherever you want. I don't know why the hell you want to shop, at this place or that place. I don't care. It doesn't matter. The point is you have the freedom. I think one of the other reasons that people are so attached to this term is that people use it as a way. It's actually a justification for sadism. Ultimately, and this is, people like this concept because it gives them an excuse for wanting vengeance. So the concept of free will feeds people desire to be sadistic to one another, to actually make others suffer. Because if they can somehow, because see, if everything is causal, then there's an explanation for why anyone did anything. Of course, there's also randomness, but then again, randomness, doesn't make any fucking sense. Basically, you just ignore randomness. For the most part, you just ignore it. No, you just do. You cannot account for it. There's no way you can account for it. So you just ignore randomness. So if randomness exists, just forget about it anyways. But so if you can actually explain every action that other people do, then no matter what they do, how hurtful it is, or to people that you love, it doesn't actually make sense for you to harm them. Well, maybe it does as an incentive. And this is why I love economics, is this is where the concept of incentives comes in. Because even if a criminal or a perpetrator of a certain crime does not deserve to be harmed for the harm that they've caused, it might make sense to impose a certain penalty. And notice I'm not using the word punishment, but the word penalty, for causing the harm that they did. And it's not to say that they deserve this. It's just to disincentivize them from doing it again, or from anyone doing it in the future. But that's not good enough for a lot of people. Some people just want to make others suffer. And when you have this idea that that they did something for a reason that they are responsible for, that they should suffer for, guess what? That gives you an excuse to punish others. So I think I'd like for you all to consider that, because it's pretty fucked up. Like seriously, it's actually really fucked up. I think actually understanding causality and understanding people's motivations, it does make us more empathetic and more compassionate towards others. And I think a lot of people don't like that, is because it would mean they would actually have to be more empathetic and compassionate. Well, you can't really make someone be more empathetic, but more compassionate, actually exercise their empathy. And anyways, I yield. Would anyone else like to speak to these points so far? Because if not, then I can continue with the presentation of this idea. And welcome, Harrison. Just to let you know, we are discussing this idea, my fundamental philosophy, and we were talking about this section about free will. And the next section is this. It's a system of amoral ethics. It's really just like a little taste of it, but it's the most essential flavor. As I said, what this really comes down to is making a point that there's such a thing as a desire for understanding. Now, this desire doesn't necessarily always get satisfied. As the point that I was making here in section 1, reality is a fundamentally mysterious duality between the realm of subjective experience and physics. So the point is to say that this cannot be understood. This is where this desire for understanding reaches its limits. It cannot be satisfied up to that point, but it's okay. It doesn't actually matter. So as long as you understand that it doesn't really matter whether you understand it or not, it's not a problem. Section 4, the idea of morality, that is the idea of ethically right or wrong actions, is nonsense. Ethics is a matter of conflicts of interest, and the question of which actions are ethically acceptable or unacceptable is decided by the interests of a particular group. This in turn is a product of the psychological sophistication of the members of a particular group, human or other, and the environmental and economic circumstances in which they find themselves. As such, there are 4 main motives for a group to create ethical standards of acceptable conduct. The most primitive of these is the practical dynamics of reciprocity. The next motive is emotional, specifically the sense of empathy and the experience of commiseration with others. The third motive is also emotional, specifically the sense of community with other members of the group. Fourth and last motive is the desire for understanding, including intellectual consistency. Besides the self-evident ways in which the first 3 motives function to establish a system of ethics, there's also the less obvious motive of understanding. In order to appease this motive, we create various arguments to explain the relationship of oneself to other persons within our reality. The claim of morality, ultimately supported by nothing but belief, is one example of such an argument. However, the most compelling argument is as follows. No conscious life is more or less objectively significant than another because no conscious life has any objective significance. This is because the idea of objective significance is nonsense. All significance is subjective. Anyone who acts with the idea that one conscious life is more or less objectively significant than another is acting irrationally. But of course, it is not unreasonable and perfectly normal for persons to have subjective biases regarding certain persons. So,
Can I comment on that?
please.
So I don't exactly agree with you that no conscious life is objectively more important or significant than another. And you say that's because no conscious life has any kind of objective significance. That's your argument. But the problem with that, so it's a kind of universal nihilism, but that kind of nihilism actually ends up meaning there's only one objective significance. Instead of saying that there's none, it's that the individual's subjective ideas end up becoming objective values.
I'm just getting myself some tea. Please keep this place in order. But I'm listening. I'm here.
So basically the idea is that if all there is subjective and each individual can only ever experience subjective ideas and values from his or her perspective, then his or her values or ideas of significance are objective, simply because they are the only possible values or ideas.
I can see the trick you're trying to play here. And just to make sure, please, let's use the hand up. We do want to make this, so if somebody wants to speak, please use the chat. I'm just commenting in between until I see some hands. I mean, so it seems like a trick you're trying to play. A word game. In a sense, I mean, the conclusion is, no, I don't think that's, well, this kind of relates to this point of solipsism, right? You know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm the only one who has any experiences whatsoever, right? But we do project onto others this idea of experience. You know, we see others and they act human, so we think that they're human. Robot. It's actually, you know, what's really interesting is the whole concept of a pet rock. Actually, if you take a rock and you draw a face on it, and you look at it long enough, you start to like imagine that it actually has a personality. It's amazing how well that works. Okay, so I don't. Someone's writing in the chat. I don't know. Does somebody want to speak? Because I'm still thinking about this. I'm just kind of thinking.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. Have the floor.
Please.
So I'd like to read another quote from Bertrand Russell. As against solipsism, it is to be said in the first place that it is psychologically impossible to believe, and is rejected, in fact, even by those who mean to accept it. I once received a letter from an eminent logician, Miss Christian Ladd Franklin, saying that she was a solipsist and was surprised that there were no others. Coming from a logician and a solipsist, her surprise surprised me. I yield.
So we're having fun with this. All right, let me take the floor. I have my hand up. No conscious life is more or less objectively significant than another, because no conscious life has any objective significance. This is because the idea of objective significance is nonsense. All significance is subjective. So to me, the key concept here is actually this concept of significance. Significance as an experience. Like really, what is significance? Because to me, because well, not we, but a lot of people act as though, or they have this philosophy, let's say, or a religion or a belief system that someone else's life is significant in regard to something else. Like all Black Lives Matter to who? Or something, or other people's lives matter. And all of that is based in that external reference of God, that there's a God, some kind of a validator, the eternal validator of significance. And here we're saying there isn't one. So we're saying that your experience of significance, presuming that you have experience, because maybe you don't. And actually, honestly, if you really want to play this game, if you really explore yourself, you'll find out that your significance is an illusion too, that you really don't. Actually, nobody's experiencing anything. Experience in itself is kind of, well, the whole thing just falls apart if you investigate it. But so we presume that other people have experience and that they find that it is significant to them, because we project what we ourselves experience. We think that we have experience and we think that it is significant. Then people create this objective significance concept, but that's the whole God thing, the external validator, but there isn't one. So I'm trying to reprocess this right now, Harrison, in regard to what you said, because I'm thinking of how do you get this whole idea from my own experience being objectively significant, and I don't think I would go to that idea. I would just stay at, I have my experience, and to me it's significant. I see other instances of something that, and I just presume, it's kind of an assumption, but it just makes more sense to conclude that other people are in the same situation that I am. Other beings, other entities walking around with, and not just humans, also talking about then, because when you look, there are also other animals. They also exhibit very similar properties. So they're like, oh, well, actually dogs really do act a lot like humans. Maybe they also have experience and feel significance about their own experience. I yield. Harrison, you're next.
So the problem is that ends up being kind of circular. So your argument against a singular or a single objective experience from the perspective of the individual is that other people appear to have the same ideas of, or the same kind of subjective experiences regarding significance. The problem is that you have taken whatever, let's just for the sake of argument not be solipsists. Let's say there's some kind of Ding and Sitch that is separate, and
there's some kind of what? Sorry, say it again.
Thing in itself, stuff. There is something, like in the German idealist sense, there is something that is eternal and separate from the mind. So either way, I'm going to say you for this, you are observing other things. Let's say dogs, you said, are very much like humans. You are observing them, creating the idea of a dog, creating the idea of fur and barking and tail wagging, etc. And then doing all this math, all this processing in your brain, and then looking at the results of the process and saying, this has consciousness. So the problem there, again, is that whatever idea of its subjective value you are assigning to it, you're creating, you are still creating. It's your idea of other consciousness, your idea of subjective value that is, it still belongs to you, that you're still creating. So either way, any idea of other experiences, other subjective experiences you might have that would mean your experience and valuation would be subjective is still your valuation. Meaning that if all of that is still your idea, is still your evaluation of the consciousness of other organisms, then that would mean really there's only one. There's only one set of values, one idea of significance, which is yours. And then the question is that not the same as that universal God idea? So if God is the observer of all, in let's say Cartesian reasoning or Berkeley's reasoning, and the reason stuff exists outside of the individual is because God is observing it constantly, God is constantly thinking of it, then would that not basically mean that the individual is that observer, that constant universal creator of stuff? So either way, it still ends up being one set of objective truth or value that comes from the individual observing.
So you're kind of saying that each one of us, is our own instance of God.
Well, you see, and again, so logically speaking, that's still making leaps. In fact, I would say the only possible knowledge or truth would be not each one of us, but just I. but then it's for all possible eyes. So, in string theory, you've got little extra dimensions curled around each point. So you've got like 3 spatial dimensions, and then you've got a bunch of extra smaller dimensions. So each mind would be like a point in some kind of space where they're still their own little closed systems, like little black holes, their own little universes, incapable of ever truly interacting with each other, each one holding an objective reality. So it's like the thing in itself would be only the entirety of the mind. But then I assume the existence of other minds just for the sake of conversation, basically. Even though I can't prove it. It's like you assume you'll wake up tomorrow, because if you don't, you can't really do anything with that. Like, why would you assume you'll die? That's just kind of meaningless. It's like that. I don't assume solipsism, but it would be a valid conclusion nonetheless.
So, right, you assume you're not the only mind to entertain yourself. Well, yeah, I do that all the time. um, um, but I don't think this is what people mean by objective significance. The idea, because then this idea of subjectivity is really, this idea of objectivity is really just subjective with, because there are other, as soon as there are other instances of objectivity, they actually become subjectivity.
But the idea there is that there can never possibly be another instance of objectivity, which is what I'm trying to say here. If we can't find any possible way in which there could ever be a second competing objectivity, which would make them both subjective, if there's only ever one subject, then it ends up being objective nonetheless. And that applies to your rights statement as well. There are no true rights. In a social context, ignoring the whole solipsism garbage, let's say, that makes sense. But in the individual sense, if I'm imagining you as an individual, as a mind, from your perspective, you have unlimited rights. You can do anything you want, and there's no such thing as an ethical or moral restriction, except those which you impose upon yourself for the sake of consistency. So it kind of applies there as well. There is no such thing as absolute, objective, universal rights, but there is such a thing as that. And it's basically whatever you want to do.
Okay, so I'm actually confused as to what you agree with me on and what you disagree with me on. Yeah, and so keep in mind that this is all within the framework of presenting this idea. And if you have a better way to express this, then please do, because it seems like you are agreeing with me on some things. Or yeah, I actually, I'm kind of confused. So if there was a way that you could rewrite this or present it in a better way, or offer your own idea, then please do, and in a succinct format, because I think that's the essential point, is that I think these explanations, they do have to be offered in a way where all the pieces of this puzzle can be maintained within a person's operating memory. You know, like, it cannot become so big. It has to be simple in order for it to be compelling, for it to be relatable and shareable, kind of thing. Well, at least that's how I look at ideas. That's how I want my ideas to be. Okay, before we continue reading on with the next section, does anybody else have any other hands up? Okay. And I just wanted to say that James had to leave because he actually runs a different group at 11 a.m. every day. They actually meet every day. And they do something called the joining game. And which is, it seems, for, I might not explain this very well, but it seems like a group of people trying to create a system where everyone tries to be an asshole, and but they still want the system to like stick together. Something like that, where everybody tries to be in it, like just in it for themselves, but they still want to see if they can work out rules that will keep it all together without it collapsing. I don't think I'm explaining this right, but this is kind of my understanding of it. But basically, everyone is trying to hijack things for themselves. Like it's supposed to be, I think they're trying to create a kind of an anti-fragile system. The only problem that my criticism of this is I think it's actually, yeah, in a way, it's like anarchy. I think what they're missing is a sense of purpose, other than, and I think that's why they're calling it the joining game, because essentially to them it's just a game. It's not. It doesn't have a real goal. Oh, you love the idea. To me, it's the idea is irritatingly and it's annoying and pointless. But I mean, they might develop some tools out of it that are interesting, but frankly, those tools should be applied in some realistic way. Otherwise, what good are they? But anyways, let me continue with this next section. And before I share the screen, I just want to welcome Jean. Hello, Jean. Welcome. Can you hear us? Hello, Jean. Hello, hello. Well, I don't know. Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit later. Let me continue with this next section. It's a short one. Section 5. The idea of inherent rights is nonsense. Rights can only be granted by one person to another. In other words, a right is granted when a person guarantees to not take action against another when the other person performs a certain action. People might have differing opinions about which specific rights they are willing to grant to others, but we tend to have a general agreement for most practical purposes. Based on this general agreement, we are able to build a stable society. So you kind of touched upon some of this, Harrison. Do we have any hands up? People with some thoughts, comments they'd like to express? Go ahead.
Yeah, if I may say quickly, so I don't have any problem with your beliefs, with your sections here. I agree with most of them, as long as we make sure to include some basic axioms so that I don't end up being confused, because just, well, how it's worded at the moment is kind of logically confusing. I guess I should copy it then, but then I'd have to rewrite most of it. But the point is, it's all good if we just look at it from a social standpoint and not some kind of metaphysical or epistemological standpoint.
I'm not sure what you mean by this distinction.
So if we assume the existence of a public space and interactions between minds, then the idea of rights and socially granted rights comes into play. It is interesting, it is useful, and I agree with your section. But if it is always not from the standpoint of some objective third party viewing over everyone, if they're written from the perspective of an individual, then I don't think that really works.
Well, it's meant to be a definition. So it's meant to be like a collective knowledge, you could say. So I don't see how it is from a perspective of an individual. I mean, it's, I mean, this whole idea of rights, it's something, rights are actually quite meaningless unless, well, at least this interpretation of rights is actually quite meaningless unless you communicate it to someone else. Like if I tell everyone, hey, you have the right to wear whatever color hat, I'm not going to beat you up for wearing the wrong color hat or shirt. Like, I give you that right. And so So yeah, it's, I mean, I could go around doing that, but for the most part, I don't have to because my government does it for me. So, but if I did not do that, and if the government didn't do that, then how would anybody know that they have that right? How would they know that they're not going to piss me off by wearing the wrong
Because okay.
hat or shirt? So their right wouldn't mean anything unless like, hey, you know what? Whenever next time, whenever we hang out, you have the right to wear whatever clothes you want. I'm not going to beat you up for it.
I think
And
I was hung up on your definition of right.
But so for the most part, basically this definition alone, just putting it out there, is essentially communicating it to everybody what's what my idea of
So
right.
you mean that a right is essentially a social privilege and not like an ethical or moral ability to do?
Yeah, yeah. It's like a it's like a social privilege. Yeah, that could be a way of putting it. Yeah, because I could withdraw my right. Like, you know what? People wearing red hats. This thing is just not good. Fuck that. I withdraw that right. You don't have that privilege anymore. Um, I mean, there's nothing to say that maybe maybe Kevin still has that right, but maybe Harrison doesn't. Whenever Harrison wears his red hat, he always loses his damn mind. Harrison, you don't have the right to wear your red hat. I don't give you that right anymore. I will take it off your head and burn it so you can't wear it anymore. So yeah, it is kind of like a privilege. Well, sure, what if you have more guns? I mean, I don't know, do you? Well, I mean, the question is, can I enforce that right, Uh, or can I enforce you not having that right? I mean, or just because I cannot enforce you not having that right. I mean, again, who has more guns? But then again, who actually has the gun pointed at the other person? Those are two different questions. You could have a lot more guns, but if your guns are in your closet and I just have a knife and it's pointed right at your neck, it doesn't really matter how many guns you have. What matters is the knife at your neck. So, this kind of power, it's all circumstantial. Or, or you might have all the guns in the world, but if you're sleeping, and I'm standing over your bed, it doesn't matter how many guns you have, right? So, and the point is that everybody sleeps sometime, it doesn't matter how powerful you are, you still got to sleep. It's kind of beautiful, actually. Everybody has to sleep. The great equalizer. Yeah, the first premise of society, everyone must sleep. Yeah, hey. You know what? That this should be a truth we should all know. That's it. This is going into the truths we should all know community, Agora community. Yeah, this is, and we're actually waiting for the next Agora upgrade, just to let you all know. And the next Agora upgrade, because some things have been a little bit confusing with how Agora was working, especially how opening ideas, opening your idea notification to work. So I have not been using this, the community Agora all that much for sharing ideas, but the first premise of society, everyone must sleep.
You might want to add some context to that one.
Well, you know what? I might not want to spam the world with it, but I at least want to I don't know. So anyways, I just saved this idea. So this is not one of my truths we should all know. And I don't know. I might not want to add context to it. Other people might want to add context. Or maybe that should speak for itself, you know? It's also really the first premise, I think, of family. It's, you know, family watches over you when you sleep too, kind of thing.
It's the first premise of any social interaction or social agreement of any kind.
Yeah. What about those who don't have to sleep? Is there anyone who does not
No,
have to
but
sleep?
there are people who can hire people to watch over them while they sleep. And that's just kind of buying other people pretty much, or buying the time of other people, but it's still a contract.
Yeah. Well, and then there are those who can buy the time of those who are bought to watch over others sleeping, you know? So, anyways, let's continue with this idea to wrap this up. Oh, yeah. So I actually have to reopen this idea. I screwed things up. I should have kept this open. It's going to take me like 10 seconds. The last section is trust in politics, and it's a very short section. Yeah. I'm really excited about this next Agora upgrade because since I'm following like 500 people in Agora, then it's actually moving real slow for me to open the ideas because you can see all these different people and it's loading all that information. But it's going to move this along much faster with the new version of Agora. Actually, because the first thing that's going to show up is going to be the comments, and then the invitations will be a separate function. Anyways, section 6, when electing officials to positions entrusted with administrative power in a society, the society is best served by electing people whose desire for intellectual consistency is greater than their selfish interests and biases favoring specific persons. I'm thinking about this, how realistic this really is. How, whether this is a conditional type of thing, whether it is possible for anyone to be actually completely impartial all the time. Because maybe it's not, but just because it's not impossible for someone to be partial all the time, that doesn't mean they can't be impartial sometimes. And the times when they are overtaken by partiality, that's when someone else can, well, that's where other people fill in. That's where other people complement the system. Does anybody else want to speak to this? And I'm gonna share this idea in the chat one more time. I'm gonna put the link to this for people who arrived later. Okay, so this idea is in the chat. Any hands up from anybody to speak about this? Any hands up? Any hands up? I'll try to comment on this a little bit further then. When electing officials to positions entrusted with administrative power, the society is best served by electing people whose desire for intellectual consistency is greater than their selfish interests and biases favoring specific persons. So this is interesting, really interesting to me, especially in relation to this new Agora community that will become a standard community that everyone is a part of when they first register. My personal values. It's going to be called my personal values, not my personal values prioritized. And so when you look at this, so you can look at my values. If you want to join this community, you can. But like I said, everyone will be in it by default soon. So I put rationality at the top because I think it's irrational to not have rationality at the top. I mean, how else can you prioritize your values unless you do it rationally? Like if you do it, because if you don't do it rationally, you open yourself up to doing this irrationally. And when you do things irrationally, nobody wins. That's just bad. So it doesn't, in a way, like all these different values, as important as they are, I think they have to be tempered by rationality. Any thoughts or comments on this so far? No other thoughts or comments on this? All right, very well then. Then I think we have completed the exploration of this idea. I mean, you know, I've had many discussions on this. Oh, Kevin, hand up. Go for it, Kev.
Yeah, I'm just wondering on number 6. You know, I'm just in the context of a candidate, you know, and I'm wondering about how Agora, like, I wonder, for me, it's like Agora creates campaigns independent of people, right? So I'm wondering, like, if in my community, if Agora became the tool that we use to you know, have the top 23 ideas within my community of the things that we want done within my municipality at the town level, right? And I'm just thinking, like, how would Agora become an operating system? Like, how does it become something to use within the community governance model, right? And I just wonder, like, in thinking about that, like, what, you know, like, how do we make Agora, how do we make politicians more accountable to the top aggregate ideas within my municipality in such a fashion that you almost, like, you can make your politician, you know, put them on a really, really short leash, right? Whereas, like, you know, the top 23 things may never change within, or they change, or how they change over time within the Agora system if I was to implement it at my municipal government, you know? So I just, like, thinking about how do you sell Agora to be this malleable tool that is independent of the manager, right? In a way, the politicians are just following the top 23 ideas, right? Like, how do we make, like, can we make politicians more, you know, make them more, like, how do you allow for decisions to happen faster? right? Like as things continue down the trajectory as we're going, decisions have to be might be needed to be made faster within our communities. So, anyways, I yield.
Kevin, I think no, I don't think we create campaigns independent of candidates. I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's what we're doing. I think what we do is we create campaigns with multiple candidates. I think that's the difference. Yeah, we still need candidates. Actually, nothing can happen without candidates. The point is that we have many of them so that the candidates become replaceable. But yeah, it's not independent of candidates. You still, the candidates are the main mechanism of implementation of these. Now, one thing that but at the same time, and I think this is actually kind of a problem for growing this system, because it does need enough candidates, it does need enough recognition in order for it to be taken seriously by others, which is why I think this is why the community agora is so important, because the community agora actually is what you're talking about. It is campaigns without candidates. And like, for example, and this is not one of the default communities right now, but in the next agora, and I think there's going to be one other community. Okay, here, let me just put this up on screen just so it's easier to imagine. But these different communities that we all belong to, like this shaping culture, it's ideas for people to, like, for example, this shaping culture idea, one idea that I have, I think we should stop celebrating Mother's Day in May or whenever it is. I think Mother's Day should be celebrated the day before your birthday. I think, one day before your birthday, you should celebrate your Mother's Day. The day after, you should celebrate your Father's Day. So it should be like 3 days of celebration. And I think it should be more individual based. It should be more, and especially that, like, if parents have multiple children, they celebrate their Mother's Day and their Father's Day on multiple occasions, because it's more specific to that person. And it's a very cultural, it's a cultural idea. There's no need to like rewrite laws or whatever, but just it's something to raise public awareness about. So like, this is one of those ideas I really want to write up and put in here. There's going to be one other community that everyone is going to be a part of. It's going to be businesses to boycott. Like, that's what we can use this to organize a global boycott of fucking major corporations that aren't really doing good things, and we don't need candidates for that. It's all done through individual action, organizing individual collective action. Another idea, this is not in the plans. It just occurred to me this morning because I've been thinking about what other communities everyone should be in by default. But the other idea for a community was world's biggest problems or something like that. I'm not actually exactly sure how to call it, but maybe it should be biggest problems facing our world or something. Biggest problems of our planet's biggest problems. Maybe maybe it should be our world's biggest problems. I don't know, but because they could be like social. It could be like world hunger, or absence of vaccines for certain or diseases. But it could also be things like climate change. It could also be things like like Amazon rainforests. Cutting down the Amazon rainforest. But this way, people can organize, globally, without necessarily, and it could be by boycotting certain corporations. So that could play into it. But raising that collective awareness without needing candidates. So, but anyways, so the point is I think Agora can be used for things like that too, that are not candidate campaigns, but for political, for like real, governmental action. We definitely need candidates, and we need many of them. You know, you know what I'm saying?
For me, in the context of introducing it to my community, right? I'm thinking on the backside of the COVID lockdown, because we're in a COVID lockdown starting again this weekend. So on the backside of a COVID lockdown, when it comes time to, try and execute Agora at the street level, engaging people within my community. If I would my goal not be to implement, to have my whole community using Agora as a tool for us to be able, in the progression of Agora, or in the International Logic Party, wouldn't it be that Agora is the tool within my municipality? Like, the more people that I can get to join Agora within my municipality to shift over to using Agora as a way to communicate.
Wait, I really didn't get your question. Can you say it again, please?
Like, how I'm hoping to, I want to introduce people from my community to Agora. How do I, if I'm able to do that, right? I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering if how do you make it, how do you actually get it to work? I want to learn how to be able to, when you're introducing Agora out in the streets, when you were handing out your placards and whatnot, how do you what's the next step? Is it to be an International Logic Party officer or something like that? Is that what the next step is?
Hold on. Your audio is getting fucked up. Your audio is getting scrambled. Hello?
Test.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Hello.
Your video is frozen. Okay, I think now we're good. Go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Anyway, I was just thinking about trying to get people in my local community to join. I want to put something within my community Agora that is going to be specific to my local community, and try and use the invite tab within a couple Facebook groups in my community to try and get people to join Agora by having local issues in my ideas. within my municipality to see if I can get people to use it.
Well, I suggest you do that by either proposing an idea or a solution that you yourself have already introduced into Agora and sharing it with them, soliciting their support, or that you ask them if you don't have any specific ideas, and I think you do have, I don't know if you have more than one, I think you have at least one for your municipal, because I saw at least one for Erin, Ontario, Canada. But if you don't want to do that, you could also ask people. But then I think it's actually easier to explain things to people when you ask them to support a specific idea, because that's actually a conversation starter. If you ask people yeah, I think it's actually more efficient, because if somebody says like, oh, well, I don't like your idea, then you can always say, well, what would you want to, what is your idea for, what should we do? And then that's an opportunity for them to express, their issues and their ideas. But real quick, I just want to draw everyone's attention to the time. We're at the 1 hour and 37-minute mark. And so I'd like for us to bring this to closing remarks. And then after closing remarks, we can hang out, unofficially, and just chit chat. So Kevin, before we, or anyone else, actually, anything before closing remarks? Does anyone else have anything to say? Starting with Kevin.
No, I'm fine. Thank you. I'm ready for closing remarks. If you want me to start, that's fine. I can start. Or otherwise, you decide.
Yeah, lead us through it, please, Kevin.
Yeah. I appreciate the call today. It was great. Our chat earlier on was great, and yeah. So I appreciate the space providing for us here, Cesare. I really appreciate that, and it's great that that you were able to hold a space for us today as well. So thank you.
If you could lead us through it, Kevin, please.
Pass it on to somebody else, I believe.
Call on people, essentially.
Okay. I'll ask for Harrison. Would you care to kick off, Harrison? Closing remarks. Thanks for joining us, Stu.
I don't have much to say. I like most of the ideas. I like that they don't depend on some kind of universal objective force, and they're very realistic, down to earth, like the idea of rights and ethics and such, basically just being individuals with different goals trying to not step on each other too much. Other than that, I'm probably going to take another look at it and maybe even copy it and play with it. That's it.
Ilya, would you have any closing remarks, sir?
Oh yeah, I was a bit late, but it was interesting to hear those ideas and kind of reminisce of the times I was thinking about those topics. But other than that, just, I mean, it was interesting and thought-provoking, and I learned a few things how Indians eat, and I just looked it up. But I mean, those things just provoke certain curiosities, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Gene, would you have any closing remarks? Cesare, would you like to say your closing remarks, sir?
Yes. Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. Actually, I just want to, one thing I wanted to say is that this idea that we discussed, it started out because it was an idea that James and we were supposed to discuss, but then he had to leave. But I'm glad that we could continue it and wrap up with it. And yeah, it's a big idea. I mean, because there are so many different ideas related. So that was fascinating to explore it. And thanks for that new idea, Kevin, not Kevin, Harrison. Everyone must sleep. Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, it was a real fun time. And I think that's all I got. So being the last one giving the closing remarks, I think we're going to bring this meeting to the end right here. And oh wait, shit, Daniel. Oh, we totally forgot about Dan. And he just left. I hope he didn't feel slighted. I actually just didn't see him. That's why I said that. So